Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. Today, we're going to talk about optimizing our AWS storage costs and performance. My name is Danny Zidoni. I'm a product enablement specialist here at NetApp. And from across the pond, I'm joined by Mike Fiorenza, who's a cloud solutions architect here at NetApp. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well, Danny. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on here. Very excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Before we start, very quick housekeeping items. So during the session, you're more than welcome to post your questions. We have chat responders in the audience who are ready to answer the questions while Mike and I present. Furthermore, at the end of the session, we'll have additional time for Q&A. Maybe Mike and I will be able to answer some questions verbally. And without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so we're starting by introducing BlueXP for Workload Factory for AWS. Essentially, it's a NetApp tool that allows you to implement best practices when designing, setting up, and operating key workloads on Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. Basically, it allows you to plan your deployment. How are we going to deploy the FSx according to best practices, whether it's for the FSx itself or for the workloads that are for the workloads that rely on it, like databases, etc. Furthermore, it helps with the day-to-day operation. For example, how do we, after we have deployed our FSx for ONTAP file systems, we can use Workload Factory to have a general management view, look at our inventory, look at our capacity, at our resource utilization, costs, and performance. And last but not least, protecting our data and preparing, making sure that we are protecting against failure, hardware issues, availability zone failures in Amazon, etc. And today we're going to focus on the deployment and how BlueXP Workload Factory can help us even before actually starting our work and taking a look at what we currently have in our AWS account and see whether FSx for ONTAP can help. But first of all, we're going to start with a quick poll just to see where we are. Zvi, if you could start the poll, please. So basically, you want to know how familiar are you with FSx for ONTAP to help us sort of make this presentation more interactive and engage how basic do we need to go, or how if we can go a bit deeper. Okay, Zvi, so do we have answers yet? Okay, while you answer, I'll give a quick introduction as to what is exactly FSx for NetApp ONTAP. So it is, first of all, it is a AWS storage service. It is maintained, it is fully managed by AWS. Although it's NetApp under the bonnet, it is a storage service. Now, AWS has many service categories like compute, networking, databases, and of course storage. And under storage, there are quite a few services. The most common and the first AWS service is Amazon S3, which is an object store service. And the block store is the elastic block storage, which is Amazon EBS, and the Amazon file system, which is EFS. And within the FSx families, there are different flavors. Among them is FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which is, as I've said, an AWS native service with delivering NetApp ONTAP as a fully managed service. If we're going deeper, we could say that FSx for ONTAP is an intelligent storage service for AWS workloads, and it is has a comprehensive set of features that we can roughly divide to 5 pillars. The first of all is accessibility. With FSx for ONTAP, you can access your data, whether it's with the NFS and CIFS. You can access it in a form of block storage, and you can also access it with the S3 protocol if you want to get access to other AWS services. So essentially the idea is you can access the same data set without duplication from different operating systems, etc. Also, many resilience and protection features, such as high availability and a multi-AZ deployment of your file systems, built-in local backups with NetApp snapshots, disaster recovery, i.e. replicating our data to file systems in a different region and having our data and our whole delivery essentially DR ready. So if we need to fail over from one region to another, then we're ready for that. And last but not least, AWS backup, which essentially takes our backups and store them on a remote location. That's an AWS service that comes with FSx for ONTAP. And there's also data security, price and performance, and mobility and copies, how we can move around our data. Today, obviously, we're going to focus on price and performance. That on the one hand, FSx for ONTAP can give us high performance for our mission-critical workloads. And on the other hand, a little bit about resilience and protection, because the way that we build and shape our solution, depending on how mission-critical it is, what are our SLAs and our RPOs and RTOs, also has a significant impact on pricing. So to get started with Workload Factory, you don't need to do much. First thing you need to do is go to console.workloads.netapp.com, and you can already start while listening to us. You can already start playing with it. You don't need to put any credentials. You don't need to connect your AWS account for the first stages. For everything that we're going to show here, I think most of the things that we're going to show here today are examples of our TCO calculator. So on the first stage, you don't even need to put on your credentials. You can just manually put a configuration. Later, you can put on read-only credentials, and then you can see your existing workloads and see and check how did they stack up. Do they actually, does FSx for ONTAP deliver a more economical solution? Now, the TCO calculator is based on AWS calculator APIs, so it's not, and I've gave it some rigorous tries myself. It is honest. I tried some very extreme cases, and if FSx is not a viable option, it will show it. So that's something to know, that we're not just pulling things out of our backsides. It is based on AWS's APIs, and it is honest. I encourage you to, you don't have to put on credentials. I encourage you to take a look and really play with it yourself. And with that, I think we can, once we're talking about, we already talked about the storage features. Basically what Workload Factory can help with is the automation process. You can put in a configuration, and then if you're ready to jump into the cold water, you can already deploy the FSx from the calculator itself. It also gives you access to advanced features that are currently not accessible in the AWS console. That's another big advantage, that you can use the BlueXP UI for very simple operations that are currently not available through the AWS console. And of course, exploring storage costs, and in the future we'll have more exciting features. But since we are talking about saving money, the best part about BlueXP Workload Factory, it's completely free. And with that, before I'm handing it over to Mike, let's have another poll. Zvi, take it away. And Mike, I'm stopping the share so you can start sharing.
Excellent. Thank you, Danny. I'll give responders a little bit more time in the poll here while I start sharing out. The trials and tribulations of having so much screen real estate. Okay. And while the poll is still wrapping up here, I believe, um, just my apologies in advance as I'm going back and forth between the calculator and the slides here, the examples that we have laid out. I am going to be switching back and forth, so that's why you're seeing this not in full presenter view. So let's see here. If we are good to go on, I will go ahead and do so. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about, of course, Workload Factory as a whole, but also talk about the calculator, as Danny had mentioned, and go through some of those examples and kind of show you what types of information, what types of performance profiles that we look for, or you as customers may be looking for to enter into these fields to gain the insight into where Workload Factory, where FSx for NetApp ONTAP can help you with your cost savings and your overall journey to the cloud. Just for sake of brevity, because I am going to be saying it probably a number of times, officially it is AWS FSx for NetApp ONTAP. I am going to refer to it as FSx ONTAP or FSxN going forward, just to save myself a little bit of breath. So the first use case that I want to explore here is EBS, right? We have a lot of responders who are saying that they are using EBS currently in their AWS environment for their particular workloads. So it makes perfect sense to kind of start there. So in this example, and these are all based on real world customers, some of the data has been anonymized, but these are the kinds of conversations that we as NetApp are having, right? This is kind of outside of the scope of cloud. These are the conversations that we as a company have with our customers, and especially those that are in that journey looking at the cloud. They're used to the way things are done on-prem. What they aren't so familiar with some of the times is how that translates into AWS as part of their overall cloud migration and cloud journey. So having something like the calculator that we're going to go through is a great place to start templatizing and understanding some of those baseline aspects of this of deploying these types of applications and solutions. So in this case, we were working with a multinational bank. They had a database workload that they were looking at, and they had particular performance characteristics that they needed to meet, of course, for this type of IO intensive workload. In this case, we have the example here. They had 25 terabyte volumes that they needed to migrate and replicate up into the cloud. They had a requirement for a specific level of IOPS and throughput. So let me go ahead and share the calculator now. And if we jump back to this screen, we are in Workload Factory. So I've signed in here using an email address, um, and I'm presented with kind of this base view. And here I have a couple of different things that are available to me. I have the workloads that we can investigate, we can deploy, we can design around. But we also have kind of the basic building block of it all, which is, of course, storage. And that is up here at the top. Now, what you'll notice in Workload Factory is under storage, we have this little drop down to explore savings. And this is really where we're going to be spending our time here. In clicking this, we can see there's a couple of different types of storage options that are available to do these comparisons for. We had talked about in the poll, talked about EBS, EFS, as well as some of the other FSx family of products under that umbrella. Right. For those of you who are in AWS currently and you're familiar with FSx, it stands for File System X, which gives them a lot of flexibility to create different file systems based on solution sets. In this case, right, we have one for comparison to FSx for Windows. But like I said, we're going to start with EBS here. And once, excuse me, once we're in the calculator, we're given some pretty straightforward types of performance metrics that we can start personalizing to our workload. Now, like I said, in this particular use case, we can click this drop down here. It was a low latency production database workload. And these are some baseline templates. If you're not 100% sure what kind of performance profiles your workloads demand, here are some general ones that you can use at least to kind of get that back of the napkin kind of math going. So here we're going to hit production databases. And we can see automatically as we start entering and changing these fields that the information on the right-hand side over here, which is our cost savings comparatively to EBS, is going to adjust as we set different parameters. So for this workload, we said we needed 25 terabyte volumes. So let's go ahead and enter that in. You can see that that number has changed immediately in making those adjustments. And this information will, excuse me, we'll leave as is. So just to show you roughly, and again, these are numbers pulled from our calculator and also AWS's public pricing. Based on the workload, the parameters that we've set, the EBS versus FSx for ONTAP conversation is kind of an easy one to have. We're looking at a potential cost savings of close to $7,000 a month in storage costs. And a lot of that comes down, if we go down here to the breakdown aspect of the snapshots. I'm going to come to that in a minute. I want to break these down line by line for everybody. So when we start looking at these costs, these charges that are associated with these numbers, you can see that from a actual sheer just baseline capacity pricing standpoint, really not too much of a difference, right? Where there does start to become those differentiators is where you're kind of paying for the performance aspect of the storage, right? In EBS, you're paying for additional IOPS. You can see that that has a total amount that's charged to you. Whereas with FSx for NetApp ONTAP, you are given a level of IOPS, it's 3 per gig. Um, you're given those IOPS out of the gate. So if those meet your needs, depending on the amount of SSD storage you look to provision, then that may be perfectly fine. If you decide that the IOPS that you're given may be a little on the low side, you can, of course, adjust this number. Let's say I needed 10,000 IOPS. That still falls within the 3 per gig that I'm given. So you can see that that number hasn't changed, but I can adjust for that higher level of IOPS. Where you do pay more for FSxN is for the throughput, right? And those are kind of the performance metrics outside of SSD that when it comes to pricing, that's really what AWS is looking at. How much SSD capacity you need. And we're going to talk why I keep mentioning SSD in a minute. Um, how much SSD capacity we need, what is the level of IOPS that we need, and the level of throughput that we need for the file system. Those are really the three kind of key pricing parameters when it comes to FSxN. Now, the big differentiator here is snapshots, and you'll notice this huge discrepancy between the two. And that's because EBS snapshots are full replicas of that file system, right? You're essentially duplicating the data. And that may sound good, but actually the cost associated with it and the ability to restore from it creates this elongated um, type of restoration time. Whereas those who are familiar with ONTAP and how we do snapshots, those are point in time, incremental, block-based snapshots. So at that point, you're getting a very, very efficient means of doing that point in time recovery for snapshots. And because again, it's only those delta blocks that we are committing to snapshots, that's where you're seeing that significantly reduced amount and cost of storage associated to them. Now, if we scroll down a little bit further, all of these parameters that we've set here are further explained in layman's terms, if you will, down here at the bottom. And you can see that, you know, it really kind of just outlines if you're unfamiliar with this, this is your first time here, maybe you're kind of just dipping your toes into the cloud waters, which I guess would just be rain. This is where you can see what each of these types of parameters are going to relate to, right? And if we go even further down to the bottom, we have the ability to drill down and view the calculations at a deeper level and actually look at the comparisons, and I'll show that in a second. Or you can export this screen that we've gone through here to a PDF or have it sent by email. And just to show you what that looks like, I'll just jump back here. This is one that I had done earlier. It's essentially what we had gone through here as part of the demonstration. You have the breakdown the parameters that were set, and the explanation below it. Now, if we view the calculations, and this can be done for any of the different storage comparisons that we can go through in the calculator, you can see that we have FSx for ONTAP up here at the top, as well as EBS below. So now you can drill down and actually see the calculations of how these numbers are achieved. So this is just one example, right? And this was a more of a high performance workload. Now, if I go back to our second example here, our second example is compared to another FSx service. That's FSx for Windows File Server. And in this case, what we're talking about is a media company who had more of a generalized approach to their file services. They had NFS, they had SMB. It was very general user-driven types of data, some file-based applications, but nothing very high in demand for the throughput in the IOPS. So when we look at that, the parameters that we're going to enter in, it was a 50 terabyte volume. They had a 35% dedupe rate for their data, and they had provisioned IOPS and an amount of throughput of about a gig. So going back to the calculator here, like we had looked at before, we can see that there is FSx for Windows File Server. Clicking into that, this doesn't look any different from the one previously. It's the same calculators, the same types of parameters that you're entering. But in this case, we're just going to say this is a general IT use case. We'll keep these as is, and we'll set this to a 50 terabyte capacity with a 35% dedupe savings. We had provisioned IOPS of 40,000 and a gig of throughput. Now you can see here that we have, again, a very significant cost savings over FSx for Windows Server. And if we scroll down, we can see that, yes, part of that comes from the overall capacity here. But in this particular instance, the throughput levels that we required, right, with FSx for Windows to scale throughput, you're scaling multiple parameters to that file system. Whereas with us, we have a little more of a customizable, a little more elastic approach to how these file systems are being built, which allows us to change parameters more individually, right? Your SSD capacity can be adjusted different from your IOPS, different from your throughput. And so that's where we start to see those cost savings really come into the picture, because we can right size and see here, based on our performance profiles, what that total cost may look like. And just like before, if we scroll down, we have again the explanation that we can view the calculations on and see those cost savings and drill in a little more deeply. And to go back to the last example that we have here, this is going to be comparing FSxN to EFS, Elastic File System. And in this case, we have an ISV, independent software vendor, that has an amount of DevOps and engineering data, right? This is a development cycle that they go through where they are creating software builds, and they're iterating on those constantly. So in this case, we're talking a petabyte of data, and now we're looking at a smaller amount of data as those builds start to roll off. We're talking about 20% of that data being accessed frequently, and a higher amount of throughput required for those development applications, for those cycles. And to jump back to the calculator, we will go back and explore the savings for EFS. And here we're going to say this was engineering data. a regional file system for the high availability that was needed. 1 PB, and 20% of the data is accessed frequently. We are going to do the provision throughput, and we're going to give this 4 gig. And if we take a look at this, right, the cost savings over native EFS are very apparent. We're looking at $55 to almost $60,000 per monthly cost savings over native EFS. And if we look down here, it is going to come down a lot to the capacity. Now, what's important to remember here, and Danny's going to talk about this a little bit, is that the capacity for this data, right, is based on 2 parameters. This is based on SSD provision capacity for that tier 1 type of storage, for that high performance type of storage, in conjunction with what we call capacity tiered storage. And that's where the data blocks, if for those of you who are familiar with ONTAP, that are familiar with fabric pools, this is going to sound very familiar. This is where the data blocks that are not being used or infrequently accessed are being tiered off to that capacity tier, which is a much cheaper tier of storage that is connected to your FSxN file systems. And that allows you to keep the hot data hot and let the cool data tier off, still accessible to applications, to users, but it's not the type of data that you want to keep on your more expensive storage. Just like you wouldn't want to do in your brick and mortar data center, it doesn't make sense to do in the cloud. So we, as NetApp, maintain that idea in our ONTAP FSxN. Now, staying in the console here, Danny had mentioned beyond the calculator, this can become a management and deployment console, right? This is kind of a one-stop shop for what you may want to be doing in AWS. Now, again, you don't necessarily need to give us permissions or set things up to directly talk into your AWS account and do these things. You can use this just for the calculator if you so choose. But if you do decide, hey, this is really interesting, maybe there is a level of management from a UI that I would like to investigate. Once you have that configured, you can actually go into your storage inventory and use these calculators and see, based on what you already have deployed, you can run these same type of metrics. So we can see here, if we explore the savings, now these are some of the storage options that this particular account has associated to it in AWS, right? So if we look at an example EBS volume, we can see here what the volumes are in this particular environment. We can see, what the instance is. Basically, we can start understanding the overall footprint of the data estate associated with this EBS. And we can click this Explore Savings button. And again, take a look here and see what we're spending now versus what this could look like in an FSx for NetApp ONTAP environment. And it's the same type of calculations that are being crunched here, but now again, we're just using what pre-exists, what you may have already running. So this is a great tool not only for right sizing ahead of time, looking at those, again, workload performance profiles and adjusting those before you do these migrations, or planning for these migrations. But also, once they're done, if you have something already, you can start investigating potential cost savings as well and see if it makes sense. Like Danny had said, there may be some situations where what you're doing may not necessarily be the right call to move to FSxN, but you have a calculator at your disposal through Workload Factory in order to do it. Now, one last thing that I wanted to point out here is, again, if after exploring these savings, after having those conversations internally, you say, hey, this is really interesting, and I would like to go ahead and deploy an FSxN file system, you can do so directly through Workload Factory. And in order to do that, I'll just go back here and actually talk through it as I go. You can click on this button right from the landing page to create an FSx for ONTAP file system. Now, this is going to be very similar to the process that you would get going through the AWS console. But what's unique about Workload Factory is as you start to create your file system, as you enter these parameters, you set your security groups, you set up your networking, your route tables, you set all these different PIOps, your throughput, your SVM and credentials. You can even set your maintenance windows. As you make these changes, over here on the right-hand side, you're going to see we have this little code box. For those of you who are doing things programmatically with API requests through Terraform or CloudFormation, as you make those changes, this code box is going to adjust in real time. Once you have your parameters set, you can download this. You can take a copy of it, paste it into your Notepad++, do your massaging, and you have this code that has been customized for you based on the parameters that you set. So now you can take that, give it to your cloud engineering teams, run it on your own, like I said, make additional changes, and then you have this templatized, programmatic, repeatable process for deploying these resources into your AWS account. So again, going back to what Danny had mentioned, you can still do this and get this type of information, this level of customized access, but you don't have to ever click create. You can get this code template and then take it and go off on your own if you so choose. So Workload Factory, again, is really designed to be as flexible as you want it. If this is a calculator, fantastic. If this is a template builder, also great. If this becomes something that, now that you've seen a few of the options that are available to you, that you want to now take this and make it part of your overall management process, even better. You can do that all from here within Workload Factory. So I believe as far as a demo goes, that is all I had to show. I'm just going to take a quick look at the questions here, see if there's anything that needs to be answered. Terraform and CloudFormation mentioned. What about Ansible? We do have Ansible playbooks that are available. Those are hosted on a third-party site. I think we can send that out probably as part of some of the follow-up information afterwards. But the Ansible, I believe, is being worked on to integrate into the code box. I just don't, it's not there yet. I don't unfortunately have a particular timeline.
Mike, so I know that some workflows already have Terraform, the REST API, and CloudFormation. I think Ansible, maybe one of our chat responders who's from the product team can answer the questions to the person who asked the question. If she knows any timelines or anything we can share. And there's a GitHub link, a NetApp GitHub link that I think it is public and has been shared with customers and prospect that, as Mike said, has all the Terraform playbooks, has also CloudFormation stacks, and also and furthermore there are also CloudFormation custom resources that can also make many. That can also do many of the features that are currently not supported in the AWS console.
All right, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And Danny, I will pass things back to you to talk about one of our customer successes.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you for the very comprehensive demo of the calculator of BlueXP Workload Factory. I'll quickly share my screen so we can get on with it. There we go. Okay, so the customer story that we have with you, unfortunately, is not a public reference, but they did have a lot of benefit post-migration from Workload Factory and basically understanding what happened. And it's a story that I'm sure many of you heard by your colleagues, and maybe it happened to you. I know for me, when before working at NetApp, I was responsible for a heavy cloud migration. Basically, what happened to this global technology provider They're providing tech services for more than 8,000 firms. So they have lots and lots of varying environments and very different workloads and different use cases. And they were forced to decommission their on-premises data center. It wasn't up to par, and migrated to the cloud. The problem was they were on a very tight timeline, so they migrated very quickly. And like sometimes happened to us all, they over-provisioned their hardware to keep the performance up and make sure that the SLAs, the RPOs, RTOs, latency, everything is up to the agreement. So storage was over-provisioned, and after a while, you see that because the deployment is not efficient, especially since they have so many environments and so many resources, it accumulates to quite a hefty sum. They understood that they need to do something, that they're paying more than they should. So with quite a long session with BlueXP Workload Factory, they were able to find the pain points and to find an optimal configuration and ways to that Workload Factory can help them on the one hand reduce the cloud monthly cost, and on the other hand, to satisfy their customers. So it was a fine balance between making your CFO happy and making your customers happy that I'm sure we've all heard about or had this dilemma. Before we wrap up, I'd like to, and Mike already touched a bit on that. What are the features that, a little bit about the features that help make FSx for ONTAP cost effective? So first of all, there's the capacity pool tiering. For those who are familiar with NetApp Fabric Pool, it might sound familiar. Essentially, the way that under the bonnet that FSx storage is built, you've got the performance tier, which is composed of the SSD, and the capacity pool, which is more suited for larger data sets that are not read and written in very long periods. So essentially, you can use that with the automatic capacity tiering policies. You can essentially classify what is considered cold data, tier it to the more economical storage tier, and already a way to spend considerably less about the amount and volume of data that you store. Other than that, what we've typically noticed with a fabric pool and with tiering is that typically 20% of the data needs to, that's a rule of thumb, needs to be kept on the hot tier, and 80% needs to be kept on the colder tier, and 80% of data being kept on a more economical tier is when it accumulates, it could be quite significant.
Hey, Danny, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt here real quick. Do you want to just double check your screen sharing? I know you're talking to some of those points, but I just want to make sure that the folks in the audience are able to see what we're referencing here.
Yes, I am not sharing. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for stopping me talking to myself. Okay, so there we are. I was talking about the customer story, and fortunately, that was that. So that's a little bit about the capacity tier, and about the potential saving. Once again, it's a rule of thumb. Some workloads may vary. Sometimes you can put more in the capacity tier. Sometimes you can put less. In addition to that, there are built-in ONTAP features that come with ONTAP, like deduplication, compression, compaction, that reduce the data signature itself. So it can also, once again, depending on the use case, can save quite a bit. Once again, these calculations were made in US East, that's North Virginia. For those who don't know, different regions in AWS have different prices. So it's also a little something to remember when planning your deployment. To wrap up, let's talk about the 3 takeaways from today's session. So first of all, BlueXP Workload Factory lets you, before doing anything, it can help you easily assess the potential cost, help you plan the deployment itself before making any mistakes. Like sometimes we rush into the mistakes. It's happened to us all. But here, BlueXP Workload Factory can give you a tool to assess exactly what do you need to build, and can also help you build it. Basically, you get the assessment gives you a detailed breakdown of what exactly, how do we reach the calculations. You can really dive into the different cost articles within the calculation. And if you want to share it within your organization, but don't want to give everybody access to Workload Factory, whether they you can also save it as a PDF and send it around. And last but not least, the best part, it's free. So you can start using today. The assessment tool itself, you don't even need to give your AWS credentials. You don't need to, obviously, sharing credentials is a sensitive point. So you don't have to give any credentials, not even read-only. You can start using, just sign up and use. And with that, I think we can, before we'll say goodbye, we have time for some Q&A if we have questions that were yet to be answered. If you still have questions, go ahead, and I'll quickly stop share and we'll read the questions. There we go. So I think most of the questions have been answered. Yes, I think we have been able to, first of all, thank you, all the chat responders, for answering the questions while we were talking. Thank you very much for that. If you do have questions and didn't have time to post them yet, please feel free to reach out. We'll be very happy to answer any question that you might have on this topic. And with that, I'd like to also share with you. This time I think we do have some people are making some questions. Okay. That's an interesting one. What's the difference between BlueXP and Workload Factory? Very good question. So BlueXP is a service by NetApp that is, the idea is to, it's more of a, let's say it's more NetApp generally oriented. The idea is it has many data services and many features that I myself don't remember even. And the idea with BlueXP period is to really manage your entire ONTAP NetApp data estate. Workload Factory is a part of BlueXP, but it's also standalone. What we've displayed here is the standalone version. I think the one that is integrated within BlueXP is not very different, but it comes in both flavors. But Workload Factory currently is only an overlay for Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. So you can't, for example, manage your CVOs from Workload Factory. For that, you can use BlueXP. Okay, and now this time hopefully I'll remember to share my screen. There we go. Yes, do you see my screen? Yes, you should at least see my screen. Great, thank you very much, Mike. So some of the resources, also a direct link to the Workload Factory console. And to conclude, I'd like to thank you very much, Mike, for coming and helping me and giving us this very thorough demo about the TCO calculator, showing us the different use cases. I'd like to thank again the chat responders who were able to answer the questions from the audience quickly. And thank you, all the attendees, for joining, for listening, for asking insightful questions that made this discussion more engaging, more interactive. Thank you very much, and hope to see you in future webinars. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.